In a world where climate disasters are being increasingly frequent, the urgency of effective climate action is more critical than ever. Recent flood in the UAE highlights the severe impacts of climate change, underscoring the needs for swift and decisive action. With COP28 concluded, the global focus is now on implementing outcomes to accelerate progress towards climate goals. Amid this momentum, WSP identified a significant knowledge gap in understanding environment concepts such as what is the difference between carbon and GHG emission, what are their impacts on climate change, and the integration into ESG strategies as well. To address this, WSP partnered with Think Zero to offer carbon literacy training, aiming to empower clients with knowledge and tools to drive meaningful and actionable change. I'm joined today by Philipp Rosenthal, Associate Director in Climate Change, Carbon and Waste Advisory in WSP, and I'm also joined by Cle-Anne Gabriel, Managing Director in Think Zero. I think it would be great if you could give a brief introduction about yourself and your roles. So let's start with you, Philipp.
Thank you, Rinku. My name is Philipp Rosenthal. I've been now with WSP for 1.5 years. I've been in this space for 17 years, working about 9 years in the Middle East and the rest of it in Europe. Yeah, I've been in this space since my studies since 2004. It is a passion project, and I'm very happy here at WSP because we bring an engineering mindset to problems and trying to solve them together with our clients. And that's it's something that I have always been very passionate about. And WSP is providing that canvas, that foundation to really have an impact together with our clients.
Thanks, Philipp, for the introduction. Cle-Anne, would you give a brief introduction about yourself?
Sure, Rinku. I'm Cle-Anne Gabriel. I'm the Managing Director of Think Zero. Think Zero is based in Australia. I've been working in sustainability for about the last 16 years or so and remain very passionate about sustainability topics across the board, from carbon and climate change, which we speak about today, to nature, circularity, and the social aspects of sustainability as well. I've been living in Australia for the last 8 years of my career, and Think Zero, as my business, is focused on providing capability building services as well as advisory services as well. On the capability building side, we provide training and workshops which are aimed at helping organizations translate engagement ambitions into action from within the organization.
Amazing. Thank you for joining the podcast, Philipp and Cle-Anne. Pleasure to have you both on board for this podcast as we talk about carbon literacy. Before we get into the details about our discussion, I think that some of our listeners might be new to the term carbon literacy and might be curious about what it entails, right? So, Cle-Anne, to open our discussion, let's look into the basics. Could you define carbon literacy for us and explain why it is becoming an essential tool in addressing today's environmental challenges?
Yeah, sure, Rinku. So carbon literacy is, at its most basic level, functions to get everyone to speak the same language. So it introduces a common language around climate change and broader sustainability topics within the organization. And as we are all sort of well-traveled peoples, we understand that the importance of having a decent understanding of language so that we can all make sure that we understand each other, so that when organizations set goals and ambitions, that their employees are on board and they are supportive and they also take ownership of those goals. And beyond getting people to that common language or that baseline understanding, we're obviously also growing awareness. We're helping to motivate people to want to do something, to take actions, to solve climate change. And then we're also equipping them with a few essential tools that give them some skill and some ability to actually do something and to take those actions towards achieving their sustainability goals.
I think very good point made there on having a common language to ensure everyone understands this definition and is on the same levels. This shared understanding is crucial for effective communication and collaboration towards environmental goals. So, with the foundational understanding of carbon literacy in place, I think knowledge alone isn't power. Action would be as well. This brings us to consider the role of organizations, right? Entities that significantly impact environment. Organizations are uniquely positioned to drive changes, right? So not just externally, but within their own walls as well. So Philip, moving from definitions to action, what do you think? How can organizations, especially organizations in the Middle East, integrate carbon literacy in their core strategies?
Thank you, Rinku. Yeah, I think Cle-Anne made a very good point there. No, we need to speak and start speaking the same language. Here in this context, we're speaking about carbon, but for sustainability in a wider context, this rings true as well. We have made and the sustainability field over the past 10, 15 years, things have gotten very complex. So for someone that is now just embarking into this journey, it is a lot to digest, lots of abbreviations, lots of complex concepts that need to be understood and then transponded to the business in question. So, moving from awareness to action, a core component is this literacy, to have a workforce, and especially the decision makers within the workforce, having a level of literacy of those concepts, so that they can start asking intelligent questions and start building sustainable concepts for the business that they have there. A very good question, a very good point is that if you see some of the other geographies that have started to formulate decarbonization goals a couple of years back, and then 2 years later, the question was not, do you have a net zero goal, but how far have you progressed on your net zero journey? The same thing we are going to see in the Middle East, where at this point of time, lots of our clients, they are formulating strategies, they're formulating ambitions and targets by 2030, 2040, 2050, 2060. But in 2 years' time, the question will be, what have you done? Where have you landed? And in order to really drive meaningful change, you need the workforce behind you. And the key missing link in this is that you need to have the workforce, you need to have them have the awareness so that they can ask questions in each of the functions of the business. How can we turn this, how would this look like if we were a net zero business? And that's really something that then it supports the leadership commitments that are already there. It supports the government ambitions that are already there. But the foundational requirement is this employee training, so that you can have the awareness, as well as then you can ask the accountability from the business.
Great point. I think the integration of carbon literacy into business operation is then a foundational step towards even a cultural transformation. And to look at the full spectrum of these benefits, I think, as you mentioned, Phil, we need to realize that every individual in the organization, like you mentioned, from decision maker to entry level, aligns with sustainable mindset and acts upon it. So a question for you both, and maybe Cle-Anne can go in first for this. How can organizations inspire every employee to not only understand but actively participate in sustainability initiatives?
Yeah, it's a really, really great question, Rinku. And I think, to the point of creating this podcast, the answer to that question is the reason carbon literacy was created. I do think the way to do this, to get everyone on board, is by giving everyone a sense of a shared responsibility in achieving the organizational goals. And the only way you're going to get people to feel a sense of shared responsibility, I think, is by getting them involved. So, what we do in these workshops, for example, is we give employees within the organization not only the time, but the space to reflect on their jobs, their roles within the organization, and then the potential roles they can play to help the organization achieve their net zero goals as well. So I think people need time, they need space, they need permission, sanctioned time from leadership to really engage in these issues. And then we start to see engagement. We see that employees feel like they have a platform to suggest actions that their organization might take to improve their environmental outcomes, for example. So I think that step of just making people feel like they have a role to play, that there is almost a co-ownership of the goals towards net zero for the organization. So a really, really important part of success.
Really good point made there. And I'm sure, Phil, you would also have some points to highlight here on the way we can encourage employees to actively participate in initiatives.
Yeah, thank you, Rinku, and very well placed points, Cle-Anne. There's one element that I see here in the Middle East where we have a very young general population and also a very young workforce comparatively to my home country, Germany, for example. And one of the key points to inspire every employee is just to look at sustainability can be an extra fuel to one's career. If you start becoming active as a sustainability champion in your sustainability committee, some of the organizations that we are working with, they have an innovation management system. So if you have an idea of how you can decarbonize your business, this is something that can support your growth in your career. And everybody is agreeing nowadays that sustainability is something and decarbonization is something that we must do, but still a very large percentage of the workforce is not actively engaging in it. So from my perspective, if I were to start right now, and I haven't heard about this concept before, I would see this as a tremendous career opportunity. And to impact your own career, but also then to impact the company and organization that you're working for.
I think, Phil, you've made an excellent point. I mean, for us who've been in sustainability for a long time, it probably was a long, slow, hard journey, but now we're seeing the trajectory of careers in sustainability just almost skyrocket now, right? And this is a form of a almost like a micro credential to do a carbon literacy training. Workshops like these can really help someone who's just thinking about how they can get into climate change, how they can, start to maybe pivot or make that next move to take that next step in their professional journey.
Amazing. I think there were really great points made, especially the mindset that needs to be made among employees to understand their role and their impact towards it, which helps them to really focus on the carbon front. And another point that Philipp mentioned, which is the career highlights, even from my experience, when I started with the sustainability journey, there were not many people who understood the sustainability front, but I see there are more awareness as well. So highlighting the involvement of encouraging sustainable actions at every level, right? And indeed, it creates an environment where every employee shares the same understanding and commitment towards environmental goals. So as we delve deeper into the journey of adopting carbon literacy, let's also look into some common obstacles companies face and strategic solutions that they can employ to navigate these hurdles successfully. So a question to you first, maybe Cle-Anne, could you outline some of the common hurdles or challenges that entities can face and share effective strategies for overcoming them?
Sure. Look, I can answer some of the challenges I've seen around carbon literacy, and maybe, Phil, I can leave it to you to talk to some of the challenges broadly that organizations face that carbon literacy might help solve. Yeah. So look, from a carbon literacy perspective, there is some of the feedback that I get or the hesitation from potential clients who haven't yet quite committed is that, there's no one size fit all. So there's, different employee groups have different interests, different skills, backgrounds. And that's a challenge that is easily overcome by creating slightly bespoke or tailored versions for different groups. So that's something that's definitely possible with carbon literacy. And also, we've also started offering training. So we offer this training across entire organizations, from the C-suite and board all the way to middle management. And now we're doing sort of industrial frontline workers as well. And so we've managed to tailor different aspects of the course to suit those different audiences. So I would say the way to overcome that is to reach out to WSP, to reach out to the training provider and just let them know what your needs are and see how they can accommodate them. The other challenge that I think any organization faces and any person providing these kinds of workshops is, overall attendance. So, unless people are already enthusiastic, some organizations might find that it's hard to get people to attend, not because they're not necessarily interested or they don't think it's important, but people are just really time poor. And so what I found really works is if organizational leadership leads by example. The organizations where I've had the most success with carbon literacy are the ones where the board and the C-suite went first. So the pilot training, the pilot programs were with the senior leadership. They understood it, and then they told the entire organization that they did it. And so people felt like if they're giving up their time for this, if this is important to them, then maybe I should do it too. And I'll say maybe the third big challenge that I've come across is, so at the end of the carbon literacy program, there is evidence of learning document to be completed. And so that takes up some time after the training to complete. And so there is a little bit of reminding that needs to happen to remind people to complete the evidence of learning, etc. But what we've started doing, and that has worked quite successfully so far, is actually allowing a little extra time within the workshops themselves for people to actually complete those documents while the workshops are happening. So they're completing it in real time. They're able to get a bit of feedback in real time during the workshops, and that helps to reduce some of the pressure and the time it will take to complete that evidence of learning form. Look, at the end of the day, the aim is to get everyone certified, get you that certificate, and to get you to that common language and that baseline understanding. So whatever can be done to help to accommodate different needs, we do it, and I'm sure that WSP is very open to doing the same for its clients in the Middle East as well. Phil?
Yeah, some of the challenges that we see is they're the usual ones, I would say. So there's a resistance to change that happens. I think not only in the Middle East, it happens. I've seen it in literally every continent. Limited resources for sustainability endeavors. That's something both financial as well as human resources. What I mentioned before, the complexity of our concepts, the ocean of abbreviations that we have amassed in the past 20 years. And then, the way we are looking at it, and this is why we reached out to Think Zero, one core for me that is missing, or that has been missing in some of the geographies that I've worked before, where it wasn't present and decarbonization and got stuck, is education and training. So we have, and we see the same thing happening here in the Middle East. We have our sustainability champions that we know. I've been here in this market for 8-9 years. I know several of them well since many years. And the sector is quite small, so you know each other. But the leadership of those organizations not necessarily understands every intricate detail of sustainability. And I very much appreciated what you said there, Cle-Anne. Like it needs to start at the top. It needs to have a leadership engagement to get the buy-in, not only from them for whatever follows afterwards, but also to show to the organization and to the workforce, hey, as you said, these guys or ladies, they are spending their time on this. So it's a good investment. Maybe I should do the same. Maybe I need to take this seriously. You can overcome these limited resources thing, and we work with our clients on making phased implementations. So to really support really every budget that is there and work on solutions that are tailored for clients. We are, in our business in WSP, we are not giving a copy-paste scope of work, but all these scopes are developed for the specific issue at hand, but recognizing and factoring in possible limitations in budgets. And then another aspect to overcome a challenge is our complex concepts is really we need to be able to clearly communicate with our clients. And that's after 17 years in this space, Cle-Anne, probably that's something that you see as well for us. We have the ability to step a step back and say, well, hang on a second. So this has been in the past like this, and this, and you have to take it like that. If you come to this new, it can be overwhelming, and so clear communication is really, really important. And we then, of course, like our teams at WSP, we give continuous support. So our phone lines are always open. So if there's a client, past client or present or future client, we always try to answer those questions and queries to support them in their individual journey. So I think these would be some of the issues that we have observed, as well as some of the way of how we can overcome this and how we are overcoming it. And the key for us in bringing this education component into the market is through carbon literacy and with the help of Think Zero.
Amazing points. And Cle-Anne, you were mentioning about the success where an organization in which the CEO attended the training and became a great success. I think it would be good to get more wins and understand or talk about these wins to encourage and highlight it to our listeners as well. So maybe Phil, I'm sure you have experienced and seen many or some standout examples where organizations were keen to introduce carbon literacy training and how effectively they can or they have implemented them.
I think we need to take a step back and look into organizations that promote any kind of sustainability education and how it ties into leadership. So a good example for this is a company, one of the most sustainable companies in the world, Schneider Electric, where a former CEO and now president, he started a journey almost 20 years ago and brought this, and this brought him into the CEO post and made it in 2021 the most sustainable company in the world. It's part of the culture, and you see that it has taken, because it wasn't common back then, it has taken a long time to get there. But what we see nowadays is that if leadership actually takes that commitment and is vocal about it and shares their vision of how could this business look like in a net zero world, and what role does it play to actually bring the society, to global society, to get there, we can see that businesses are transforming themselves a lot faster than that. And that's really what excites me, because quite frankly speaking, we don't have 15 years anymore to transform businesses these days. We have a lot less time. But through education, through leadership commitment, we can see companies progressing on that a lot faster.
Yeah. And Phil, you've already had some interest, haven't you, from organizations?
From organizations here, yes. I mean, we have had... we are close to signing the first contract. We're currently preparing 3 proposals that are going outside the door this week itself. So there is interest, because there is this gap in the market, and sustainability budgets are not large normally. But the beautiful thing with this certification course is that it actually there can be an agreement with HR, because HR has usually employee budgets that can be made available for things that tie into the business strategy, that tie into the sustainability strategy. So we are ticking a couple of boxes with this carbon literacy, and that's why we have seen quite a bit of uptake here on that.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. It ties into learning and development budgets, as well as sustainability budgets, as well as audit and reporting and strategic budgets as well. That's a really great point. I suppose, Rinku, to answer your questions about where I've seen success, I do have some examples of where, to me, coming out of carbon literacy sessions, the results are almost immediate, right? I've seen coming out of these sessions, I've seen entire organizations have committed to transition to zero-emission vehicle fleets. I've seen commitments to the regreening of their office spaces. I've seen an organization that's committed to internal carbon pricing trial within the organization. I've seen an organization committing to waste and zero plastics goals in their organization. And these are all very real examples from previous and existing carbon literacy clients. So it's almost in the room while they're discussing what can be done, especially if leadership is already present. Then they start to think about what can be done. And, I've seen where these commitments then translate into action, and I do like to try to follow up and see where these organizations are on their journeys as well. The other thing is I've seen, this carbon literacy places sustainability on the scorecards of every single person in the organization. So where, for example, in the example where I've seen an organization wanting to try internal carbon pricing, so that came directly from their CEO. And then everyone else in the organization who did the training was so supportive. They all could think of ways that their particular roles, whether they're in IT or in finance or in procurement, how they can help, how they can contribute to helping the CEO achieve that goal of trialing internal carbon pricing, because they all had the same language and they understood the importance. I think there's another good news story. What I've seen started to happen, particularly with my port clients, so infrastructure clients, who have very large Scope 3 emission liabilities. So those emissions that are coming from their value chain. And you've probably heard that when we speak about Scope 3, we talk about how difficult it is to actually influence and reduce those emissions. But this is a great way to engage the organizations in your value chain, in your Scope 3. So what I've seen some of my clients are doing, particularly some of my port clients, is they are not only training their employees, they started inviting their tenants and their customers along to the training as well. And so that means that not only are they getting their own people on the same page, speaking the same language, they're bringing their entire value chain along with them on that journey. And so that's almost the first step in not only looking at reducing the emissions or decarbonizing the organization itself, but also decarbonizing that organization's entire value chain. And so I think that's a really meaningful sort of outcome. And I come back to the impact on people and the employees. I think this is another way that we can have a just transition. So rather than it coming always directly from the top where, and just because, my boss told me to do the training, which yes, that can be the case. But I think it allows employees, like I said before, to feel like they have a little bit of control, sanction, time and space to really think about how they can do something. So to me, those are all very real stories of success that I've seen already because of carbon literacy.
Yeah, very, very interesting, Cle-Anne. I think some of our clients that are more, let's say, in the private equity and sovereign wealth fund space, they own a lot of assets, and getting the strategy developed is one thing, but actually then getting the assets to move is another thing. And Scope 3 emissions, they're the problem because it's difficult. But because this training is bite-sized, it's in terms of spending, it's not like the funds they would be paying for an entire strategy and implementation program. It is something that is a bite-sized contribution to the assets' individual decarbonization journey. So. And I think this is a very, very, very important point, because we don't have the time and we need large wins in terms of climate change, in terms of decarbonization. We need large wins. We need large pockets of influence and then transitioned and transformed fast. And the finance sector is very important in this context because they have this ability. And then the second is how to do it. Okay, it comes again with education and then empowerment, but also leadership and leadership commitments and sharing a clear vision and communication. So yeah, great points, Cle-Anne. I think there's a lot that resonates here for us in the Middle East as well.
These are really great points, and that's amazing where the training provides immediate effect and employees take these points to implement and integrate solutions into their business, and especially the value chain. Looking into the learning from these success stories, it's clear that it's just not the outcomes, but also metrics that help these organizations measure their progresses, right? So let's look into how companies can effectively measure and report on the impact of carbon literacy initiatives, ensuring that they not only meet, but can also exceed sustainability goals. Maybe Phil, if you can provide some insights on this.
They're the typical GRI indicators that are like trained employees, and then in terms of age and in terms of rank. Those are I would say, the easy ones. What would be then, depending on the business that carbon literacy would be rolled out. You could then also look into the amount of innovation ideas that have been submitted, if there's an innovation management system that are dealing with carbon. Obviously then at the end, once this is piloted, you can also share KPIs about those pilots and their potential impact if rolled out to the entire business. And then, of course, it will eventually have an impact on the overall carbon intensity. If you take, and we just spoke about this, but Scope 3 emissions, for example, you have to train, and we are seeing this right now, you have to train the procurement department, the procurement function, so that they are asking the questions, what kind of changes do we have to make to our procurement tenders, but also to the contracts that we sign in order to decarbonize our Scope 3 emissions. These are the questions that can only come up after you have trained the procurement experts, because they're procurement experts, they're not carbon experts.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really great point. And I'm actually seeing, so I like that you mentioned financial services before, because it's sort of the main sector at the moment for driving a lot of the action around carbon and climate change currently around the world. But procurement, I'm starting to see, is emerging as the discipline or the area that is very quickly becoming the front line for organizations' action on Scope 3 emissions in particular, but overall for even within their own organization for decarbonization. So I think taking your procurement teams through carbon literacy would be another important factor for success.
Yeah, because it influences, between 70 to 90% of the overall emissions of an organization, of any given organization. So it's massive, the impact.
We calculate, even if we're calculating on spend-based methodology, it's in the term, right? They're in charge of spending, and so this is extremely important.
And also, if you have not, let's say in your procurement, in your contract that you are providing your supplier with, if it's not embedded there that they need to report on their carbon that is associated with the service or product that they are supplying you with, after the fact, to get that data is close to impossible. So if you don't put that in at some point, you're never going to get it. So this is just one aspect of it. So they are also the interface ensuring that you get primary data from the suppliers so that you can actually show impact on Scope 3, because through the spend-based global averages, you will never be able to show that there are reductions. Only if you consume less, which is part of the equation, of course. But if you then you are in conflict of interest of the supplier. But if you want to show, okay, a win-win situation is get the data from a supplier that is on a decarbonization journey, him or herself, because then through the primary data supplied via procurement and flows into Scope 3, you can actually show, now we are being supplied with green X and Y, you fill in the blank, and this has had an impact.
Yeah, that's an excellent point there, Phil, as well. Yeah, about the data. That's a really important one as well. And yeah, you're right. It all starts with them knowing what to measure, knowing what data needs to be captured, and we're coming back to this common language and this baseline understanding.
Really good points made here about Scope 3 and how data plays a big role as well. Let's look at some future improvements. I'm sure, like all the fields, we can anticipate future trends and shifts in the landscape of carbon management and literacy. So maybe, Cle-Anne, looking ahead, what emerging trends in the carbon management and literacy should organizations be aware of? And how can they adapt to stay ahead in this dynamic environmental landscape?
Look, it's all changing all the time, Rinku, if I'm being completely honest. New standards, new markets, new technologies, it's just new policies. Everything's shifting so quickly because we're all on this accelerated timeline towards this big global goal. So, the new standards, okay, it's obvious. So we're all talking about the new reporting standards and best practice. We know that there are new markets opening up in form of carbon markets, but we're also looking to see what some of, not the typical more developed countries are doing. What emerging markets like the UAE, are starting to how they can contribute towards, this overall net zero goals for the world. We're starting to see, new technologies. We just spoke about data. Like we're absolutely relying on things like blockchain and digital technologies to help us, tag and trace carbon through the world's economy to help us solve some of the really complex Scope 3, other carbon challenges we're facing around the world. And it's just here in Australia, I saw, an announcement that we've just saw a big change come from our climate active certification here in Australia, which is a really important one because they're the ones in charge of our carbon neutral certification. And I hadn't had a chance to read it because it's just happening so quickly. There's so many changes. But today I found out that they're now looking to stop using the term carbon neutral because it can become quite confusing to people who are new to this and don't understand the difference between carbon neutrality and net zero, that they're two different concepts. It's all new and all the time. And so, again, a course like this, one, we're continuously updating it. So you're going to, we're going to make sure that you have always the newest, latest data. But two, some of it is just evergreen. It's so that the knowledge is fundamental that it gives you the tools you need to make sense of the new trends. So while it maybe can't predict it, you can make sense of it. You can unravel it because you have those fundamental concepts already in hand because of carbon literacy.
Exactly. I mean, the what we spoke about earlier, Cle-Anne, if you dabbled in carbon and greenhouse gas accounting maybe 15 years ago, making sense of the net zero standard today or the work that the Science-Based Target Initiative is doing is a lot easier because it just deals with one gas. It just deals with, let's say, the business setting, and it's not looking to all aspects of society. So very, very good points, Cle-Anne. I think some of the trends that we are going to see, I'm looking into different countries' legislation. Some of the European countries, they have started to share proposals for laws, but also shown already signed bills that you have to prove to how you're supporting the government in their decarbonization journey as a business if you want to win public tender. So it's a very binary yes or no. Are you supporting us? Okay, show us your audited accounts. Very similar to the financial sector. No, you need to have an audited account. You need to have a proper business in order to have a license to operate. And I'm expecting something very similar to come up with carbon because we are now after many, many years after the UNFCCC and the Kyoto Protocol, and now with the Paris Agreement, the net zero work of the SBTi, we are mature enough to be able to ask this of certain suppliers to governments. So that's one thing that I'm expecting to see popping up here and there. Another thing is that carbon is going transversely through the business. It will touch everything. So we spoke about procurement. Procurement will be massively changed through that component. But even this change in procurement will then have, you will see different styles of supplier engagement through supplier engagement programs that could have, for example, carbon literacy as a foundational course, but also then more specialized courses on how to bring down your energy consumption, how to integrate renewables in the different markets, and how to reduce then the supplier's Scope 3 emissions. No? I'm expecting to see a lot more supplier engagement programs to really have that impact on Scope 3. And I'm thinking and I'm hoping, this is a wish, that finance is playing a major role in this. We have seen the first start of it, but I hope that through the emergence and maturity of climate finance and green finance products in the market, we will see a lot more of that coming to bear.
Yeah. Look, I've seen a statistic, Phil, at least it came from an Australian source, but I think it's global. They're saying that the majority of climate modeling now is not actually being done by climate scientists, but by financial services. So the financial service players are the ones really modeling climate and really starting to think about the financial repercussions to our economies from climate change. So I think that's not something that you hope for anymore. I think it's coming your way, Phil.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is, I spoke to somebody from a private equity background last week only, and this was basically, it's becoming now a business model of certain private equity firms. They buy companies that have nothing. They put them on an accelerated learning path for 2-3 years, then start to implement. And at 5 years, they they sell them off, but they have everything leading practice implemented within the business. And then the delta they can sell it for is apparently financially very attractive. So for that, you need the organizations to support you with that journey, and that's a role that WSP can play. And carbon literacy is definitely one of those core foundational courses that need to be brought to the table there.
Amazing. So building on the foundation of the strong understanding of carbon literacy, reporting practices, and even future trends that you both mentioned, I'm now curious to know, and I'm sure our listeners would be as well. For an organization looking to offer carbon literacy or enhance its carbon literacy, what are the most effective initial steps to take? And maybe Phil, if you can provide some insights.
Well, I think one thing is that both the HR and the sustainability leaders within the organization have a key role to play, because from an organizational development perspective, it falls into the responsibility basket of the HR leader. And from a sustainability perspective, it falls into the responsibility of the sustainability head. So one of the two, ideally both, they should play a driving force in bringing carbon literacy programs to their organization. It's those two elements together that it really can ensure a widespread employee engagement, like widespread adoption of the program, together with what we had mentioned earlier, if there's a leadership commitment or even ideally an initial leadership workshop on carbon literacy that then gets echoed into the business. These would be the most immediate initial steps. So an identification from the sustainability and or HR leader, the signing up of the C-suite or the leadership of the business, and then echoing that participation and the importance of the topic throughout the organization, so that you get a larger adoption of this topic in order to create that common language that we had mentioned several times before.
Yeah, look, I agree with everything that Phil's just said, honestly. I think if we must take only one single first step, then it has to be leadership first. And so, sustainability and HR leadership are a really great place to start. And procurement, maybe.
Yeah, very true. I think to add to the emerging trends, I think the procurement function, you will see a very different procurement function in very short years. A lot more carbon focused, because the success of the business will depend on the carbon intensity on the services and or products that they offer. So procurement has a major role to play.
All right, so this brings to an end of our podcast. Thank you, Philipp and Cle-Anne, for the insights you have shared today with our listeners. It's clear that the journey towards carbon literacy and its integration into corporate and personal realms is both challenging and rewarding. To our audience, thanks for listening all the way through. If you find yourself puzzled by terms related to carbon, or if you are well-versed but struggle to articulate these concepts, remember that help is at hand. If you're wondering how net zero goals align with ESG strategies, or how to effectively embed these into your business to meet global climate targets, WSP and Think Zero are here to guide you. We offer training and support to clarify these concepts and help you integrate sustainable practices seamlessly into your operation. Reach out to us and let's accelerate your journey towards impactful environmental stewardship together.